Hi everyone, welcome again. NBA recap today, breaking it down. This is the 18th edition now. Goodness, wow, this thing's just been rolling around. The season's been going great. Lots of good shit's been going on. This is the kickoff of my other podcast, Sports and Shorts and Sorts, out every Monday. But hey, saying that, let's jump right to the craziness of the NBA. Each week, I start by going in the Atlantic, in the Eastern Conference with the best team in the NBA still, the Boston Celtics. They went 2-0 this past week, not a busy week for them, extending their winning streak to 9, which is tied for the longest of the NBA this season. They beat the Knicks in Madison Square Garden before returning home and beating up on the Sixers. The Celtics host the Mavericks tonight. That should be a tasty matchup. Kyrie returning to Boston. The Celtics extend their winning streak to double digits, which would be the longest of the season thus far. Said it tons of times on these NBA recaps all season. The Celtics, they're the best team all year. They got the best starting five in the NBA. They have an 8 game cushion over second place in the East, which is the same gap from first to seventh in the West. Like, this team, they're damn good. They're holding on to this number one spot, and they're not letting go of it. I see them finishing number one in the East, going into the postseason. That's where we're really going to judge this team. Are they going to finally get over the hump? They've been so close so many times. Or are they just going to be the Buffalo Bills of the early 90s? We'll see. We'll see what happens with them. But we'll leave Boston. We'll go to the Big Apple. We'll go to the Knicks. The Knicks went 1-3 this past week. As they just mentioned, they lost at home to the Celtics before pulling off a crazy one against the Pistons. I'll get more to that when I get to the Pistons talk. But it kind of made up for what happened to the Knicks earlier in the season when they lost to the Rockets. I'll just say that. But the Knicks would then proceed to lose the next 2 games at home, both by double digits, losing to the Pelicans and then the Warriors. They're just struggling to finish games lately. They're missing a lot of people. OG Anunoby, they're saying he's hoping to be back by the middle of March. Julius Randle's shoulder injury, Mitchell Robinson's foot injury, these are a little trickier. These guys can't just come back from what they're dealing with. Jalen Brunson's been doing his damnedest to keep the Knicks relevant and do what they can to win games. Josh Hart has been stepping up. It's crazy how well he rebounds for a 6'4 player in the NBA. It's crazy. Dante DiVincenzo is continuing to play well with extended minutes. Precious Achua just kind of seemed like a throw-in in that OG trade, but he's been playing fantastic. I don't know, he was great in Miami. He just never quite lived up to it in Toronto, but under Coach Tibbs in New York, he's doing great. Well, other than that Warriors game, but to be fair, a lot of the Knicks didn't show up for that game. Things aren't going to get easier for the Knicks. They got games against Cavaliers, Hawks, and Magic, so they're gonna have to go through without these injured players and keep it afloat until they can get them back, get the reinforcements in. Keeping on in the Atlantic, we'll go to Philadelphia. The Sixers went 1-2 this past week. They surprised the Donovan Mitchell-less Cavaliers team, beating them, but then they'd fall to the Bucks and Celtics. They're doing all they can to stay afloat without Joel Embiid. There's still no timetable on when last year's MVP will be coming back from a knee surgery to a torn meniscus, but he's saying he hopes to be back by the end of the season. So this is a tough job for Tyrese Maxey right now. The first time All-Star is doing everything he can, like I said, to keep the Sixers afloat. If they can keep and like lock into the playoffs when Embiid comes back, they're fine. But they could free fall here. He's not getting a lot of help. The last 3 games this past week, Tyrese Maxey has been leading the team in scoring, but where's Tobias Harris and where's Kelly Oubre Jr.? They need to step up. The last 3 games, like I said, Maxey's leading the league leading the team in scoring. Second highest scorer in those games. Cameron Payne the one night, DeAnthony Melton the other, Ricky Council the fourth. So Tobias, you got to show up here. Oubre Jr., like, you got to help the team out here. Otherwise, by the time Embiid backs, if they're in a play-in kind of situation, oh, that could be disaster city. We'll see what happens. I think they have enough to stay afloat. They have a big enough gap. Next up in the division, the Brooklyn Nets. They went 2-2 this past week, getting blown out by the Timberwolves, but then they blow out the Grizzlies. They got smashed by the Magic, but then they'd smashed the Hawks. So that kind of sums up the Nets season in a nutshell. They go out and drop an egg like they did against the Wolves and Magic, and then they come up and beat up on a depleted team, and then beating up on a Hawks team who had been playing really well coming in. Cam Thomas went down with an injury in that win over the Grizzlies, which kind of opened up some more time for Dennis Schroeder, who came over in a trade from the Raptors. And it's looking pretty good so far, but it's hard to read. They could look like crap the next day. This team is very unpredictable. The Jekyll and Hyde of the NBA for sure. We'll wrap up the Atlantic by going to the Toronto Raptors. They went 2-1 this past week, winning back-to-back games on the road in Atlanta and Indiana. Then they would then lose at home in the Dallas Mavericks. And after that win over the Pacers, it was the first three-game winning streak of the season. I know that's kind of late into the season, beginning that. But earlier on the season, Coach Darko Orjakovic promised to buy the team dinner after a three-game winning streak, so he had to pay up. Everybody was saying pizza party, but it sounded like he went a little bigger. Listening to commentary on that game was very weird because I hadn't heard about the pizza party thing, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? But they ended up losing the game at Dallas, which was a tough one that they were in at times. Luka Doncic just went crazy, but the Raptors, they appear to be trending in the right direction. Guys are getting healthy. Former Knicks that came over in the trade, Emmanuel Quickly and RJ Barrett, they're getting more familiar with the offense. RJ's efficiency has just ballooned since coming over from the Knicks. Scotty B, a constant triple-double threat. And that win over the Pacers, Scotty Barnes recorded his fourth triple-double this season, already setting a franchise record for triple-doubles in a season, which I imagine will grow as the season goes. Speaking of things that can grow, another big bench contributor has been Grady Dick. Dick has found his stroke lately, and he's really been helping the team. Like I said, they're trending in the right direction. Some big games coming up. The Raptors playing the Warriors, the Hornets, Pelicans, and Suns. So those are some tough ones. We'll see. That'll be a real good measuring stick to see where this team's at here. We'll leave the Atlantic for the Central Division. We'll go to the Cleveland Cavaliers. They went 2-2 this past week, losing to an Embiid-less Sixers again. They seem to have the Cavs number without their main guy, but they would then beat the Wizards before playing that classic game against the Mavericks. Max Strus caught fire like in the NBA Jam video games. He had 5 3-pointers in the final 4 minutes of the game, including a 59-foot game winner at the buzzer. It was crazy. Second longest regular season buzzer beater since 97-98. It was frickin' wild. The next night, the Cavs went into Chicago and lost in double overtime to the Bulls. Maybe they were a little tired from the emotional win the night before, but yeah, I wouldn't be worried about the Cavs. Like I said, there hasn't been a legit threat to win a title in Cleveland since LeBron left until this team this year. And I might be getting ahead of myself. A real barometer will be this upcoming Tuesday when the Cavs host the Celtics. If the Celtics can keep their lengthy winning streak going into that game, look out. That'll be an exciting one then. Mobley and Allen, they're really starting to play well, playing along each other. You know, Mobley had those injuries early on in the season, and this team is just so deep, you know. I can't believe earlier in the season, like before it started, I said Okoro should be starting over Strus. What's going on? Well, I look pretty dumb with what happened there, but Okoro's been great off the bench and such a great defender. And Karis LeVert must have heard me saying give the sixth man of the year to Malik Monk because, man, he's putting his name in the hat and then some. 14 points, 15 dimes, and 7 boards off the bench in that loss to the Bulls. Well, keeping pace in the division, you have the Milwaukee Bucks. Much like Stella, they've got their groove back. Winners of 4 in a row. The Bucks went 4-0 this past week, going into Minnesota and beating the Timberwolves. They beat the Sixers before beating up the Hornets in back-to-back games. Doc Rivers has his team learning their new identity, you know. Much like someone fresh in witness protection, I imagine it's tough to learn a new identity. And Giannis and Dame have been doing their thing, getting more consistent play from Malik Beasley, and that's really been great. And it seems like Doc's relying on Bobby Portis Jr. a little more. You know, different coaching, switching things up. Pat Beverly and Jay Crowder seem to be a rotating door of shithousery in the backcourt. Their tenaciousness on defense seems to be really setting the tone here, making up for the, you know, getting rid of Drew Holiday to bring Dame into town. But the Bucks have some tough games coming up. They face the Bulls, Clippers, and Warriors. It'll be tough. But they could extend the streak to 7 by the next episode. But hey, they could get shocked by those Bulls, or, you know, either way, this Bucks team, they're taking the corner. Let's see if they can maintain it and keep it up against some stiff competition here. Next up in the Central, the Indiana Pacers. They went 2-1 this past week. All games were at home there. They trounced the Mavericks, but then Pascal Siakam's old team, as I mentioned, the Raptors, they'd go on a late surge to beat the Pacers, and then they'd bounce back when beating the Pelicans, leading that game from start to finish. The Pacers have found their way, I believe, and, you know, Halliburton's got that true partner in crime in Pascal Siakam. And combine all that with the increased role and results of Benedict Mathurin. My pick for most improved player, like I said, maybe a season early on that choice, but this team's scary. They're deep. They're young. I don't know how deep they'll go into the playoffs, but they have a little West Coast trip here, taking on the Pels again before going to Texas and taking on the Spurs and Mavs. So they then return home for a big matchup against the Timberwolves. But Ole will go to the Bulls of Chicago. The Bulls went 2-1 this past week. They beat the Pelicans, but then they would lose at home to the Pistons. The Bulls bounced back, beating a Cavs team in double OT, which I just mentioned earlier. And I ranted about how scary this Bulls team can be, and they have the vets, the right mix of youth to really surprise people. And I know that it seems like Billy Donovan's doing it more for matchup purposes, but I've really been praising the idea of playing Nikola Vucevic and Andre Drummond together. I know other people are like, you can't play two bigs anymore in today's NBA, but look who's leading the Western Conference in the NBA. We'll get there. They rock a pretty big lineup, and it can be done. I think Donovan's got to roll with these bigs more. Like, in that win over the Cavs, Vucevic, 24 points, 13 boards. Andre Drummond, 17 points, 26 boards. Andre Drummond, he's older now, but he's still one of the best rebounders in the game, and it shows whenever he's on the floor, he's racking them up. We'll wrap the Central up by going to the Detroit Pistons. Pistons went 1-2 this past week. They'd lose a tight one to the Magic, where there was a questionable no call on an obvious travel by the Magic. The Pistons would then lose to the Knicks in Madison Square Garden, which I mentioned. Some karma kind of going the Knicks' way for their loss earlier, but that didn't help the Pistons. They got to get some good karma going there. With just seconds to go, the Pistons were up. The Knicks missed their shot. Then the ball looked like it was suddenly covered in grease. No one could get a hand on it. It went to a Pistons rookie, Asar Thompson, who looked to try to dribble up before throwing it a pass. He was tackled, straight up tackled by Dante DiVincenzo. A good tackle, but not allowed in basketball. But no foul was called. The ball ended up in Jalen Brunson's hand, who'd found Josh Hart, who'd get the basket and the foul. Detroit Pistons coach Monty Williams was livid, usually an even, calm guy. You know, he was absolutely going shit about it. And the refs, like, after the game said, yeah, we kind of messed up, which didn't help Monty Williams, who said it was the worst non-call he's ever seen. Tough loss for a Pistons team who has not got a lot of wins, you know? And you think, how would they bounce back after something like that? But you know, they'd show that they can face adversity. They went into Chicago and they beat the Bulls. You know, I may have to take back some of my earlier comments in the year when Cade Cunningham was down, and I thought, hey, the Pistons look pretty good without him. Maybe it wasn't so much Cunningham. Maybe it was Killian Hayes out there and taking away time from Jaden Ivey, because it seems like this team's improving every day with their new roles following the deadline deals. Like Simone Fontecchio, I liked him in Utah. Seems like they tried bringing him off the bench here, much like Fontecchio's former teammate Jordan Clarkson in Utah. It might be a good combination for him, but with their most recent win, the Pistons climbed out of the Eastern Conference basement as well. First time like in a long time. We'll finish the East up by going to the Southeast divisions, starting with the division-leading Orlando Magic. They went 3-1 this past week, winning a close one in Detroit. They then get blown out by the Hawks the very next night. The Magic would bounce back, winning big over the Nets and then beating the Jazz. The Magic are in this tight group in the East, where 4th to 8th is just separated by a game and a half. The Magic can continue their great play and jump above this group. You know, they have their next 3 games against the Pistons, Hornets, and Wizards. Very winnable games for a team like the Magic. They could be at 7 wins in a row by next episode. Paulo Banchero, the All-Star, is looking like an All-Star. He's leading the Magic in points, rebounds, and assists per game. So that's very impressive. We'll stick in Florida, go to the Miami Heat, nipping at the heels of the Magic, just half a game behind them in the standings. The Heat went 3-1 this past week, an eventful week for the Heat. In their win over the Pelicans, there was a little kerfluffle, you could say, by the sidelines, and there would be some suspensions handed out. The Heat would have Jimmy Butler and Nikola Jovic get suspended 1 game, and Thomas Bryant would get 3 games. The Heat would then go to Sacramento to face the Kings without a lot of their players, and despite their absences, the Heat would go on to beat the Kings. It was so impressive. The Heat went to rookie Yami Yadikez Jr. down the stretch, and what he's doing as a rookie is just crazy. It shows you can go to college for 4 years. You don't just have to be a one and done player, because his impact on the Heat is something else. And it was kind of funny, the Heat players who were suspended, like I said, Butler, Jovic, and Bryant, they had a little viewing party for the suspended players. You could see them rooting on the team during the game. It was kind of cool to see. And yeah, and that loss to Denver there, or sorry, the Heat would beat the Blazers before going into Denver and losing. But in that loss to Denver, Thomas Bryant, who had played with the Nuggets last year, hadn't received his championship ring yet. He was able to show up and get his ring, but he had to leave this arena immediately after because he is serving that suspension. So the NBA were like, "You can get your ring, but you got to get out of here." But yeah, they're kind of turning it up right now. They had a 5 game winning streak going into that Denver game, and I can see them starting another streak here when they host the Jazz tomorrow. Next up in the division, Atlanta Hawks. They've been dealing with Trae Young missing time due to surgery. The All Star guard had to undergo surgery to repair a ligament tear in his finger, his left hand, but he'll be reevaluated in 4 weeks. The Hawks, with his absence, they went 2-2 this past week. Well, I guess they had him in the Raptors game, his last appearance in that game they lost, but they'd bounce back without Young, winning back-to-back games over the Magic and Jazz. They'd then go to Brooklyn and fall flat on their face. Maybe they're out in the nightlife or something, but they looked really bad that game. But DeJounte Murray, he's really stepped up as the primary ball handler with Young gone. And that's really the position he's meant to play. He's meant to have the ball in his hands. So we'll see what happens. This is kind of like an experiment for the Hawks, forced by injury, to see what's up. Jalen Johnson, he's been really great at walking potential triple double when he gets time. Bogdan Bogdanovic has filled in the starting lineup nicely, and DeAndre Hunter's kind of filled in that Bogdanovic sixth man role. So we'll see what the Hawks can do here. Like I said, and it's an experiment process right now. They're going to see, do we stick with Murray? Or when Young comes back, do we ship out Murray? We'll see what happens here. A big test for the Hawks right now as they still want to get involved in the playoffs as well. We'll leave Georgia, go to North Carolina, where the Charlotte Hornets went 1-3 this past week after having a little 4 game winning streak. They'd lose to the Golden State Warriors, where Grant Williams would take some exception to a late layup by Warriors Lester Quinones. Some words were exchanged, a little bunch of nothing, basically. The Hornets would bounce back with a win in Portland, but they would then have to face the Bucks in back-to-back games, which is not good for anyone, and they'd lose both of those. This team's still improving with the new look roster. The biggest improvement's really been on the defensive side, and that comes with Grant Williams in there as well. And as long as you're playing good defense, you're in every game. And the Hornets have games against the Sixers, Raptors, and Magic, so they'll be hoping to get at least one of them, but with increased defense, maybe try to take all three. We'll wrap up the Eastern Conference, go to the American capital. The Washington Wizards, they've been struggling. Owners of the longest current losing streak in the NBA at 13 straight, obviously going 0-4 this past week, losing by 41 to the Thunder, then losing to the Cavaliers and Warriors before losing in a tight overtime game in Los Angeles against the Lakers. This team is struggling to show fight on any given night. You know, they show great effort against the Lakers in that game, but you look at the debacle in Oklahoma City. Jordan Poole to the bench seems like the right move, and Corey Kispert, and more notably Denny Avdia, have been developing, but this team just doesn't defend, and that makes things so much harder. Marvin Bagley seems to have found his way with this team. Hopefully he can keep it up and keep consistent numbers, because if you look at that draft class, he's really sticking out on that one. Cardinals kind of hit Kyle Kuzma a bit, you know, while after they beat the Pistons during that record-tying losing streak the Pistons were dealing with, Kuzma said, you don't want to be that team, you know, referring to someone that loses to someone on that long losing streak. But hey, now the Pistons are above the Wizards in the Eastern Conference, as the Wizards are now the basement dwellers. We leave the East, we go to the West, start in the Northwest. Conference leading Minnesota Timberwolves. They went 3-1 this past week, losing at home to the Bucks coming out of the All-Star break. They would then win 3 in a row all at home. You know, they'd beat the Spurs, the Grizzlies, and they continue to do it on the defensive end. You know, best defensive team in the league. Anthony Edwards continues to be the young leader on this team, despite dealing with an ongoing ankle injury. Karl Anthony Towns had to miss the game against the Spurs, but Naz Reid, he's been such a good backup big man in this league. He filled in, and they didn't miss a beat. They have the right pieces to contend. They are unproven in the playoffs, though, and that's the rule of thumb usually in the NBA. You gotta lose in the playoffs before you can win in the playoffs. So it'll be intriguing to see what they do. But until then, you know, I think they can hold on to the best record in the Western Conference. But like I mentioned at the top of the show, the West is tight. First to eighth is only separated by 8.5 games. So any complacency or lackluster play could have you drops in the standings real quick. We'll go next up in the division, next up in the conference, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Thunder went 3-1 this past week, beating the Wizards by 41, as I alluded to, for winning back-to-back games against the Houston Rockets. The Thunder would then go on the road to take on my Spurs and lose by 14, ending their six-game winning streak. It was a big matchup for Chet Holmgren, as he had a rookie battle against Victor Wembanyama. But this bout went more to the Frenchman this time, and it was, like I said, a surprising result. OKC expected to win this game, but despite the loss, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander continues to look like an MVP of this league, one of the best players in the league. J-Dub's still looking like that legit second scorer. Last episode I mentioned Chet Holmgren was maybe hitting a rookie wall before the All-Star break. He's used those gangly legs and has stepped over the wall because he's looking pretty damn good again. And those numbers against Wemby were good. Just, Wemby had a better game. But much like the Timberwolves, this team will purely be judged on what they do in the postseason. And much like the Timberwolves, this team hasn't lost in the postseason yet. So it will be interesting come playoff time. Which will happen? Do you have the young team actually surprising and advancing? Or are they going to follow suit and get upset in the first rounds of the playoffs? We'll see. They have some tough games coming up against the Suns, Lakers, and Trailblazers, and they can't sleep on the Blazers on the end of that road trip. That could be a trap game for them. Next up in the division and the conference, we go to the defending champion Denver Nuggets. They went 4-0 this past week, rocking a 5-game winning streak. They beat the Blazers, Warriors, Kings, and Heat in a rematch of last year's final. Nikola Jokic continues to do unreal Nikola Jokic things. He's just something else on the basketball court. And most of that title team is still on the roster. You're missing some guys, Bruce Brown, Jeff Green. But these guys, the guys they have left, the guys that have left have opened up spots for other guys, and they're doing quite well filling those holes there. It was a troubling scene for the Nuggets in their win over the Heat, though. Canadian guard Jamal Murray went down with an ankle injury and had to leave the game. It didn't look good. You could see everyone like, oh no. So hopefully it's nothing serious for him, because without Murray, I don't think they win a title. We'll stick in the Northwest, go to Utah. The Jazz went 1-2 this past week, beating my Spurs before losing back-to-back to the Hawks and Magic. This team's still slumping a bit. Winners of 3 of their last 10. Lauri Markkanen's continuing to be the main guy in Utah. Jordan Clarkson still rocking that gunner role off the bench. And I like Colin Sexton running the offense. Seems like they're really going the youth route with Coach Will Hardy playing rookies Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks more. So we'll see what kind of deal the Jazz do going forward. Are they going to push full youth and just play the cards where they lie? Or are they going to try to get into that playing spot? Because I don't know. It looks like they're going with the youth route here and just playing out the young guys to see what they got. We'll go to the basement of the Northwest with the Trailblazers. They're 0-3 this past week on a 9-game losing streak, the second longest in the league, just behind the Wizards. Blazers lost to the Nuggets, Hornets, and Heat. And, it's been a growing experience, a learning experience for the Blazers. Jeremy Grant continues to be a great vet on that team, helping the young guys out. Anthony Simons is developing into the scorer they're hoping him to be. Rookie Tamani Kamara has returned to the lineup, and he's played well. DeAndre Ayton looked to pick up a hand injury in that loss to the Heat, so hopefully it's nothing too serious for him. The Blazers have back-to-back games against the Grizzlies coming up, so hopefully they can end their long losing streak. I hate long losing streaks after what we saw earlier this year with Detroit. We'll leave the Northwest, go to the Pacific, the division-leading Los Angeles Clippers, the team with the 4th best record in the West. They went 1-2 this past week, winning in Memphis before losing back-to-back games against the Kings and Lakers. The Kings loss was by 16, but the close loss to the Lakers kind of felt worse. Clippers coughed up a 21-point lead in that one, giving the Lakers their first season series win over the Clippers since 2012. But again, I'm not worried about the Clippers. They didn't have Paul George for those 2 losses, as he's missed some time with a knee injury, but Coach Tron Lu said it's nothing too serious, should be back soon, so hopefully he is, and it is nothing serious. This team's very capable of beating anyone in the league in a 7-game series. They host the Wizards before going on the road to face the Timberwolves, Bucks, and Rockets. We'll leave California briefly to go to Phoenix, where the Suns are just behind the Clippers in the division and the conference with the 5th best record in the West. Suns went 2-1 this past week, losing a tight one in Houston against the Rockets. They bounced back and beat the Lakers, and then the Rockets again, and this time in Phoenix. But some chippiness in that second Rockets matchup. Lots of chatting between both teams, and rookie Cam Whitmore tried to get into it with All-Star Devin Booker. Nothing really came out of it but some technical fouls. But tomorrow the Suns and Rockets have another matchup, so I'm expecting the officials to give some warnings up before tip-off. Suns then play the Thunder, Nuggets, and Raptors, so some tough games for them. And we're still dealing without Bradley Beal. He's had that hamstring issue that's kept him out even like a long time, it seems here. We've seen maybe the big 2.5 this season because the big three's barely been on the floor together. They're running out of time to get this chemistry going on their project. Going back to Cali, we'll go to Capital Cats in Sacramento. Kings went 1-2 this past week, going to LA and beating the Clippers. They would then host the depleted Heat roster and lose to that understaffed club. And then De'Aaron Fox also picked up an injury. He would then the Kings would then go into Denver and lose to the Nuggets, and Fox didn't suit up to that one. Hopefully that ankle injury is nothing serious. The Kings have only won 4 of their last 10, and Sabonis was still putting up triple-double like numbers, and it looked like Herter had found his shot, but he's kind of struggling with that again. Could be the absence of Fox as well, but the Kings need to turn things around quickly. Schedule is not helping them out. They got games against the Wolves, Bulls, and Lakers coming up, so we'll see where the Kings come up at the other side of that. Next, we go back to LA with the Lakers. They went 3-1 this past week, beating my Spurs in a close game. They'd go on the road and lose to Phoenix, but bounce back with that big comeback win over the Clippers I mentioned. LeBron was a throwback in that one, taking over the fourth quarter like we've seen him do, I don't know, 1,000 times. The Lakers would then hold on to an overtime win over the Wizards, but man, I cannot say this enough. How lucky we are to see what LeBron James is doing at his age right now. It's amazing. The team seems to be rallying a bit here. Winners of 7 of their last 10. They're trending in the right direction. Anthony Davis is playing some of the best basketball of his career. Like a lot of teams I've mentioned, though, the schedule is looking like it's tough. They got dates with the Nuggets, Thunder, and Kings coming up. We'll wrap up the Pacific with going to the Golden State Warriors. Big news with the franchise as they agreed with head coach Steve Kerr on a 2-year, $35 million extension, making him the highest paid coach in NBA history. The Warriors went 3-1 this past week, beating the Hornets before losing to the Nuggets. The Warriors would then go on the road to beat the Wizards and Knicks. And the Warriors, are really starting to click. Much like the before mentioned Lakers, this Warriors team, and they've won 8 of their last 10. The Klay Thompson of the bench move is looking fantastic. Chris Paul is back in the lineup, and perhaps the biggest addition has been the ongoing improved play of Jonathan Kuminga. He truly has become the difference maker for this team going forward. There will be moments where he'll be called upon to, add to this team's legacy or potentially lead to the breakup of the team. It's a lot of pressure to put on a 21-year-old, but I think he can handle it. He's the real deal. And we'll finish up my team recaps going to the Southwest Division, starting with the division-leading New Orleans Pelicans, 6th best record in the NBA right now. The Pels went 1-3 this past week, losing back-to-back back games, at home to the Heat and Bulls. The Pelicans would then go into New York and beat the Knicks before falling to the Pacers in Indiana. This team has all the potential in the world, but just are not reaching it right now. Sure, they're leading the Southwest, but they're pretty far down in the standings. So there's tons of pressure right now. Pressure on Zion Williamson. Pressure on head coach Willie Green. This is a period right now for the Pelicans where over the next few months, I think they're going to be judged harshly from the front office, and the future of this club will be determined during that time. So no pressure. Just behind them in the division, the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavs went 2-2 this past week. They beat the Suns, but then they go into Indiana and lose by 22, ending their 7-game winning streak. The Mavs would then lose 2 in a row, losing at the buzzer by that insane Max Strus game winner. You could see the roller coaster of emotions on the face of P.J. Washington. Once he got that no-look pass from Luka and finished that tough bucket to put the Mavs ahead, he was flexing to the camera. He's like, shit, we got this one. And then you see his reaction when the ball went in. He's like, damn, scratching his head. It's a brutal way to lose, but what a shot. The Mavs would bounce back by going into Toronto and beating the Raptors. It was Luka Doncic's birthday, and he gave us all a gift with the show of a triple-double. 30 points, 16 dimes, 11 rebounds. Not a bad night out. Kyrie continues to thrive next to Luka, despite everyone saying he couldn't. The before-mentioned P.J. Washington and Daniel Gafford continue to look great in Mavs colors. The team's finding their way for sure, and like I mentioned earlier, they have that juicy matchup with the Celtics tonight. It'll be interesting to see if the Celtics can continue their winning streak, and you got to think Porzingis is going to try to have a big night against his former team. We'll stay in Texas, go to the Houston Rockets. They went 1-3 this past week, winning a close one against Phoenix at home. They'd proceed then to lose 3 in a row, back-to-back games against the Thunder before that most recent one in the Suns, where Whitmore kind of Booker. The Rockets really haven't been playing bad. They've just been playing in some really stiff competition, and that's kind of how it goes in the Wild Wild West. Fred Van Vliet back in the lineups really brought stability to that backcourt that seemed to be lacking it. It's helping Jalen Green out for sure. Sengun is still looking dynamite, but just he's not as consistent as he was earlier in the year. But that could be attributed to the improvements of Green and the rest of the team. And I got to shout out Jabari Smith Jr. The youngster rebounds like crazy for a swingman. Like you're like the dude's totally should get rebounds, but not everyone rebounds like him. Check out his rebounding numbers some nights; it's crazy. We'll walk to Memphis. The who's roster of the Memphis Grizzlies went 0-3 this past week, losing to the Clippers, Nets, and Timberwolves. They were in those tougher games, but just did not show up for the Nets game, and that's what happens when you have a makeshift team here. They've been fighting, and you got to expect that. Jaren Jackson Jr. has been really doing it all for the Grizzlies, and I constantly badger on him to pump up those rebounding numbers, but I got to give him love. I can't criticize him and not give him love when he gets rebounds. Big night against the Timberwolves, 33 points, 13 boards, and you know they have a tough front line, so those are good numbers there. We'll wrap up the weekly team recaps, go to the basement, to the Southwest and the West. My San Antonio Spurs went 1-3 this past week, losing to the Lakers, Jazz, and Timberwolves before ending their losing streak with that surprise win over the Oklahoma City Thunder. Like I said, it was a showdown of the two Rookie of the Year candidates, and Wemby flexed on Holmgren a bit. 28 points, 13 rebounds, 7 assists, and 5 blocks. It's so amazing watching him on the court. It's something else. Devin Vassell continues to put up big scoring numbers. The team's starting to figure out who's who's going to be sticking around next season. You know, they're Wembanyama's figuring out how to play the NBA better. It's an adjustment coming over from Europe, and he's a young guy. He's figuring it out. It's exciting to watch. But hey, that's the breakdown of the teams. Hopefully, your team's trending in the right direction. We're starting to see which teams are contenders and which are kind of pretenders. But teams are starting to get hot at the right time, and that's what you want. And saying that, individual shit real quick. Some stats. Mavericks Luka Doncic still leading the league in points per game at 34.4. SGA of OKC behind him at 31.2. And you have Giannis Antetokounmpo, Donovan Mitchell, and Kevin Durant rounding out the top five. Rebounding leaders, we go to Sacramento, Domantas Sabonis, 13.2 per game, followed by Minnesota's Rudy Gobert, Lakers' Anthony Davis, Denver's Nikola Jokic, and young Detroit Jalen Duren. Sticking with consistency, the assist leader is still Indiana's Tyrese Halliburton, averaging 11.6 per game. Trae Young sits in second with 10.8, and he'll be sitting there for some time while he recovers from surgery on his finger. Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, and Sabonis round out the top five. On the defensive side, Oklahoma City's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander leading the league in steals with 2.1. Just behind him, though, is Sacramento's De'Aaron Fox at 1.9, with Donovan Mitchell, Portland's Matisse Thybulle, and Clippers' Kawhi Leonard rounding out the top five. For shot blockers, you go to my Spurs' Victor Wembanyama leading the league in blocks with 3.1. Behind him, Brook Lopez. And then Utah's Walker Kessler, who's still coming off the bench. OKC's Chet Holmgren and Lakers' Anthony Davis round out the top five. Individual numbers usually translate to team wins. Not always, but this season it's trending that way. And in saying that, let's jump to the Ren City top five. This week's top five, by yours truly, look like Boston Celtics, Minnesota Timberwolves, Denver Nuggets, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Oklahoma City Thunder. I mentioned at the beginning of the show the Celtics, best team in the league, and of course they're staying at the top of the Ren City top five. We'll see if they can extend their winning streak to 10 against the Mavericks. Timberwolves, they're in second on my list with the best record in the West right now on a 3-game winning streak. Our defending champion Denver Nuggets just behind them, riding a 5-game winning streak. Cavaliers had a little slip up in double OT against the Bulls, and they just can't seem to beat the Embiid-less Sixers. But they are still the real deal and sit fourth on that list. And I have Oklahoma City over the Cavaliers. I would have had Oklahoma City over the Cavaliers, but that loss to the Spurs keeps them in the 5th spot there. And I do a little trophy talk too, not just championships. But if you do remember, I picked the Bucks over the Lakers in the finals. Hey, it's looking like maybe that could happen right now. There's a lot of ways to go, but let's see what's up. MVP race, I still have SGA, Gilgeous-Alexander leading that by the thinnest of a kitten's whisker. Nikola Jokic is right there for me. They're really close. The pack behind them includes Luka Doncic and Boston's Jason Tatum. Rookie of the Year, I mentioned the battle of those two giants who are the future of the NBA, Wembanyama and Holmgren. Earlier in the season, I thought it was Holmgren. Then as he hit the wall, Thought it was Wemby's, and now it's going back and forth. But I have Wemby just ahead by a long neck and neck here. Six man of the year, Malik Monk. I think he's still got it, but Karis LeVert, I mentioned the Cleveland slithering in there. I think Tim Hardaway's kind of dropped a little out of that race, but we'll see what happens with him. Most improved, I'm still leaning towards Kobe White of the Bulls. With Trae Young out though, that's going to open up more touches for Jalen Johnson. I mentioned earlier, the guy's like almost a walking triple double every night. So with more minutes, he could put up some big numbers. But I still have Kobe White winning that. I just feel like that race has gotten closer. Coach of the year, I still have Minnesota's Chris Finch, but narrowly, if Boston continue this winning streak and extend that gap in the Eastern Conference, you're gonna have to give it to Joe Mazzulla. He's Chris Finch has that surprise factor for what the Wolves are doing in the West. Everyone expected the Celtics to do, but just because people expect you to do something doesn't mean you're going to do it. So it's very impressive what he's doing. And I've neglected about the Defensive Player of the Year talk all year for some reason. I don't know why, but I just kind of figured it'd be going to Rudy Gobert of the Timberwolves. He's the anchor of the NBA's best defense, and I figured he'd get it. But it'd be cool if Wembanyama can slither in there with his 3.3 blocks per game, but I figure that's going to Gobert. But hey, that is 18 NBA recaps in the book, y'all. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope I got you up to date on all the NBA action and you're ready for more to come. The playoffs are lingering. A lot of people might shy away from the NBA coming up because NCAA March Madness is coming up. You can hear more about that on my other podcast I mentioned. But yeah, shit's getting crazy. Tune into basketball. It's been good stuff. Thanks again for coming along. I've enjoyed doing it. Hope you've enjoyed listening to it. Ren City out.